Again, my name is Stan Kalwasinski. I think I know almost 75, 80% of the crowd here. A lot of relatives I invited. Thank you very much for coming. But for the next hour or so, we're going to give you a glimpse of automobile racing, the history of automobile racing in the Grundy County, Illinois area. And there's a lot of history, a lot of tradition, and thank you for the lights, and we'll see if we can make this work. Grundy County Fairgrounds, we're going to talk about the Mazan Speedbowl, Midway Quarter Midget Track, and the Grundy County Speedway. It's a glimpse of racing, as I said, in these parts. Before automobile racing, horsepower automobile racing, there was horsepower at the fair at Grundy County, down there in Mazan, Illinois. This photo was in 1908, I believe. Thank you to the Historical Society for providing me that shot. It was a 3/8 mile track, and they had horse racing and horse shows, and that was pretty much about it. There's a shot of the fairgrounds. This is in about 1930s. You can see population, track, housing. The track was like situated right there in the neighborhood in Mazan. And there's a photo of the 5th mile track. They had a half-mile track. I'll get into that a little more, but they had a big half-mile dirt track from about in the 1920s to about 1936, and they built this little 1/5 of a mile track, which is pictured there because of midget auto racing that came into these parts. And have a few midget racers, Bruce Field here. Midget racing was the sport of automobile racing, or the most popular sport of automobile racing here in the Middle West. There's a shot of the Grundy County, or that's the Mazan Speedbowl shot there, an aerial picture. And that came about in 1947. There's Grundy County Speedway. They moved the fairgrounds out past to the north side of Morris. And how many remember the old roof on top of the grandstands? That's from about 1985 at an ArtGo Challenge Series race. And they're lining up, a big crowd there that afternoon, ready to go racing. First documented race. I did some research, and a fellow by the name of Art Peacock, who was, I believe, from Mazan here or in Morris, one of the two. He did a lot of tracking down about racing at Mazan Fairgrounds, Mazan Speedbowl, and people have said, oh, they started racing in 1950. No, they started racing there in 1923. Well, the first documented race that he could find, and I'm going with what he found, was Labor Day, September 6, 1926, during the Grundy County Fair. And pretty much those early races there were held during the annual fair, which was held on that Labor Day weekend each year. A guy named Oscar Giamatti from Mazan was the winner that day in an old Model T stripped down, and he was the winner. Jim, you remember him? Some historical notes. And the first track that they cut out at the fairgrounds down there in Mazan was in 1923. 1926, they built a new half mile using some of the old 3rd mile track, and auto racing came about. As far as I know, and other historians can't find any other documentation before 1926, so I'm going with 1926, that first automobile race, September 26. Again, Oscar Giamatti, businessman in Mazan, was the winner. A couple of days later, 4 days later, September 10th, a driver by the name of George Brown from Bloomington, Illinois, was a winner. And through 1926 through 1935, it was automobile racing. And the only kind of automobile racing at that time was open wheel cars, kind of like a sprint car today, no fenders on it, and some of them were stripped down Model Ts, some of them were, they used different chassis, automobile chassis, passenger car chassis to build some of these cars. And that from 26 to 35, they had annual races during the Grundy County Fair. And very few spot dates otherwise. I mean, they didn't run every other Sunday afternoon or the 3rd Sunday of every month. It was pretty much during the fair. And through those years, there were winners like Carl Young, Cowboy Hardy, Red Campbell, Shorty Sorensen, Vern Franke, and Wally Zale. And of course, probably to 99% of you folks, those names don't mean much, but this guy Wally Zale is kind of an important guy out of Chicago, and we'll talk about him a little later. There's your typical car that would be racing at the fairgrounds in the 20s, early 30s there at Mazan, and that was driven by a guy named Danny Ogden, who was from, I think from Mazan, from the area. And thank you to someone put together a historical booklet on the history of Grundy County, and that picture was in there, and I stole that from them. Another shot, there's your typical race car. That's your typical open wheel car, probably built on a Model T or some Ford chassis possibly. You know, drivers up there, head well above the cowl, and you know, it was a dangerous sport. I mean, let's face it, there was a lot of bad accidents, some fatalities, et cetera, at tracks all out throughout the Midwest. And here we go, 1936. Midget auto racing came to Chicago. I call this the Chicago area. I'm pretty liberal with that term. But midget racing came about in 1935 outdoors. Soldier Field was one of the first tracks to have midget racing in the Chicago area. But here it is, 1936, and Wayne Carter, who was the secretary, I believe, of the fair, he got this idea, well, we'll build this little 5th-mile track, and we're going to have racing on this dirt track because this midget racing is really pretty popular. And there's your ad, Sunday, August 31st, and Labor Day, September 1st, midget auto races at the world's biggest little county fair. And if you see there, the posted purse was $1,200, and also they had 12 vaudeville acts. And I'll tell you a quick story. Wayne Adams, who was the long time announcer at Raceway Park in Blue Island, Illinois, he'd come out to the fair. He lived in Chicago, like 55th and Cottage Grove in that area. He'd come to the fair. I don't know how he got out here, drove himself, or come with a buddy or two. Two things he told me. He said, one, motel, hotel, you know, for 2-3 days of racing? No. You just go into one of the barns out there, grab a fresh bale of hay, pop it open. That's your mattress for the night. Take a little siesta before the races. But he also liked, here's a guy from Chicago, young guy, 19 years old or so, 18, 19. And, they've got vaudeville shows, girly shows. And we'll talk about that some other time. But they, it was a 5th-mile track, open competition, and send your entries to Wayne F. Carter in Mazan. And there's some of that early racing, 1939 or so. And at car number 1 is Wally Zale. He won some big car races there at Mazan at the fairgrounds. Now he's running a smaller 5th-mile track. And Wally Zale set a record. He won 67 feature races, midget feature races in 1940, I believe. And that was the all-time record for feature wins in a season forever, I think, for midget automobile racing. And there's the fairground. Of course, the fair's going on. You got the Ferris wheel going, some other stuff in the background there. 2 midget drivers, Ted Duncan in the 15 and Harry McQuinn in the 4-car. Them were 2 top guys that raced all over the Middle West. McQuinn was a multi-time starter in the Indianapolis 500. And that's a cool picture. I mean, it shows the guys that were racing over there. And how did this picture come about? Well, Wayne Adams, he was on the Ferris wheel, and he had his camera, and he shot this picture, get a kind of a broad general view of the infield at the fairgrounds there, the 5th-mile track. Another picture, there's the cars. This is probably in the 40s, maybe just after the war or just before the World War II. And one thing you'll notice, look how close the fans are to the race cars. Pretty darn close, kind of exciting there. Some noted Mazan midget drivers, and I won't go through them all. We've mentioned Wally Zale. He was the first midget feature winner at Mazan on the 5th mile in 1936. We mentioned Harry McQuinn and Ray Richards. Danny Claytis, Tony Bentonhausen from Tinley Park, Illinois, was kind of the most popular driver in these parts for many, many, many years. And others, I mean, Leroy Warner, Mel Kenyon, the king of the midgets. He started racing at Mazan with the UARA group and others, Bobby Grimm, Mike McGreevy, Bob Richards from Lockport down the road here, and others. There was just a lot of talent from the 30s and into the before the track closed in 70. There's that driver, Wally Zale, again. Feature winner, 67 feature wins, I think it was 67. I'm sure the year was 1940. But the one thing interesting is he was killed, not in a midget wreck or another big car wreck, but was killed in an automobile 2 train accidents off of 159th near Cicero Avenue. They tried to beat one train, got hit by the one train, and got hit by another oncoming train. And him and another guy, Frank Peroni, who was another racer, they both perished in that accident. There's Harry McQuinn after a victory at the fairground, or at the fairgrounds there in Morris. And I think there's an ad there for the Morris Daily Herald. Back in the day, Harry McQuinn was a multi-time starter in the Indy 500, and also later became the chief steward down there at the big Speedway. Ray Richards from up north, Evanston, Illinois, was another front-running guy. And these guys would travel. And one thing I was thinking about even coming here when I got behind that double-wide trailer, took me forever to get here down I-80, was how did these guys race? And I've got it documented at home. They raced down there at Mazan during the afternoon. They loaded the cars back up on simple little trailers and ran all the way back to Riverview Stadium or Riverview Speedway in Chicago, there on Western and Belmont, where the old amusement park was. How in the world could they get there, race down here at Mazan, and hustle all the way back? No interstates, no nothing. Maybe, I bet you the races were better than going back to Chicago than over at the Mazan. We mentioned Tony Bentonhausen. He was the winner of the first, that's an early shot. That's at the 5th mile track, about 1941, sitting in that number 21 car. Tony was the winner of the first ever midget race at the Mazan Speedbowl in 1947. He was the feature winner that afternoon, but that's a little earlier shot of him. Bentonhausen area is at 1961 at Indianapolis in the Auto Light Special. That car was fast. They were thinking they were going to qualify at over 150 miles an hour, be the first guy to ever clock in at 150 plus miles an hour to qualify for the Big 500. And the weekend or the Friday before the first day of qualifying, took another car out for his buddy Paul Russo. Something in the steering let go. Going down the main straightaway, the car flipped, caught fire, and Tony perished in that race. But Tony Bentonhausen was just the popular guy in Chicagoland and Middle West racing, for that matter. Midget track record, they said the Mazan Speedbowl was the fastest quarter mile in the country. Well, some other people disputed that. The people that ran South Bend Speedway, they kind of had a little battle going there. But Henry Banks set a track record, 13.06 seconds in September of 1947. And Henry Banks was a 1950 national champion, IndyCar champion. So he knew how to get around, but that's pretty quick, I think, for a quarter mile of 1947, some 70 plus years ago. And that picture doesn't do it justice, but there's a 1948 Grundy County Fair Midget Auto Races souvenir program, Mazan Speedbowl, and I got this from the Bud Kaler family. Way down at the bottom along the entries is a guy named Robert Kaler, and that was Bud Kaler. He was a midget racer long before he even thought about racing stock cars. And I was grateful to the Kaler family for giving me that program years ago. Here's a shot. This is at the Mazan Speedbowl. That opened in 1947. And Bob Sheldon, a Chicago area photographer, caught this picture. The guy's name was Alton Milliken, and he's going for a ride there. And he survived that wreck, went off the racetrack. I don't think he clipped a car, but he ended up with a couple scratches and raced another day. Pretty spectacular shot, and there's the old Ferris wheel in the background. Bob Tattersall, big winner at the Speedbowl. He won a 250-lap midget race. 250 laps in a midget. Could you do that, Bruce? Back then? No. But 250 laps, won the feature in 1958. Drove for Tony Saylor, who's the second guy in the back there from the left, and they won this 250-lap race. And Tattersall was from Streator, top runner, won two-time champion with the United Auto Racing Association, and was a national USAC champion in 1969 for the midgets. He knew how to get around. And where did he start? In stock cars at the Mazan Speedbowl. There he is in the early 1950s and in a stock car. That's your typical looking stock car from back in the day. Here's another shot of a pretty big crowd at the Mazan Speedbowl. And this is probably late 1940s, maybe early 50s. Big bunch of cars there for a day of racing at the Speedbowl. There's Mazan midget racing, pack of cars going into the turn there and under the main grandstands. At that time, I believe that was the part of the main grandstands. Again, another midget shot. This is probably in the late 50s, 57, 58, 59, somewhere in there. Here's a cool shot. Guy in the number 5 car in a traditional kind of midget has that wheel, left wheel, front wheel up high off the corner, and another fellow driving that roadster style type midget car at the Speedbowl right around 1959. I don't know who those drivers are. I've asked people. Ron Kessler's with us, the Mazan man. I've asked him and I've asked other people, and they don't know. They say, well, I think that's so-and-so or that guy, but I don't really have a positive idea on those drivers. But I think that's really shows you what midget racing was all about there at Mazan. Mel Kenyon, I mentioned him, the king of the midgets, 7-time USAC midget champion, and his brother Don working on their midget at the Mazan Speedbowl. And he was from, I believe, Davenport, Iowa, born and raised there in Davenport, started racing stock cars at the Rockford Speedway, got into midget racing, raced with the UARA group for many, many years, and then went USAC racing, won a whole bunch of races and championships, ran into 500. One of the top guys here in the Midwest for many, many years, and he was a Mazan regular. UARA Midgets, program cover from 1969, I believe, and they raced midgets there on a weekly basis in 69. The UARA Midget group was there every, I think it was Saturday night, I believe, but don't quote me on that. But it looks like a pretty decent crowd, a lot of midget cars in the infield. I think that's going into turn number, help me out, turn 3 maybe? Or was that turn 3? 3? 1? Do I hear 5? No. Yeah, that's a new grandstand. So that's the looking northwest, I would think, if I'm got this figured out. Stock car races at Mazan. The first race came about in 1950. That's 74 years ago. I know because I was born in 1950. Bud Ferguson was the winner that day, April 30th, 1950, in a newspaper ad. This was right out of a newspaper ad. Admission was $1. Man, that's pretty good for back then. And then it said 9 cars turned over last week. Well, that's pretty exciting. But the best part of that whole ad was, if you have a weak heart, don't come. Just a bunch of shots here of early stock cars at Mazan. They became popular. All of a sudden, in the Middle West, Raceway Park, Soldier Field, all these tracks that had the midgets weekly and were packing people in. All of a sudden, the crowd started to dwindle because these stock cars started. Well, there was more accident, cars flipping, wheels flying off. I mean, it becomes this, wow, this is pretty darn exciting. And the midgets all of a sudden are taking a back seat now to the stock cars. Ooh. Another shot of some of the cars. So that's the main straightaway, but till they switched it to the Beck straightaway. And here we go, stock car races, Mazan, Speedbowl. Here's another ad. Only 2 more programs this year. This is about 1950, I believe, or 51. Regular program next Sunday, and they got the big 200-lap Midwest Championship race coming up there on the Sunday, September 21st. It's the roughest races in the Midwest, you know. There it is. There's the proof. Proof's in the photo. They tore them up pretty darn good. And there's another guy. He's flipping over there, and a couple cars running around. And another one there, stuck over the guardrail there. And there's another one torn up. And this is, I guess, after they took it back home. And this was a car owned by Burdett Carter. that was connected with the fairgrounds for many, many, many years. And the OVJ sponsorship on that car, OVJ Body Shop, was owned by Oscar Giamatti, who won the first race at Mazan back in 26. There's just some poster of stock car races, Mazan Speedbowl every Sunday afternoon, one of the pit passes for the Mazan Speedbowl. And I thought all these pit passes were cool. Those old pit passes, they had a little string there and you tie it on your belt loop, and then years later you pile them up in a box and they'd be there forever. Now they give you a wristband, and by the time the races are over at night, the wristband's all icky and it's not, I don't know, it's not art. That to me was art. Again, they raced, at Speedbowl. This is early 1950s. I mean, there's like going 2, 3 wide in the corners. And so you can see, and if somebody had a problem and they flipped 1 or 2 of these cars, the fans would be there and they'd like what they saw. Again, some more just different shots of early, this is again all 1950s racing at the Mazan Speedbowl. First champion at Mazan was 1950, a fellow by the name of Norm Legner. Drove the number 63 car there. There's Norm up in the upper left corner. His son is racing at Grundy County Speedway currently. His grandson and I think great-grandsons also race in various divisions out there at the Speedway. And I like that front end. It looks like he's ready to do some serious racing. Yeah, well, Frank Welch on the far left of that picture, and Jim Cushing, I believe, was the gentleman. He was a second there to the left. I don't know who the young lady is in the picture, but the fellow on the far right of the photograph there is Wayne Carter. And Wayne Carter is pretty much the guy that brought automobile racing to the Grundy area way back, 26, figure it out, 26, 23, or 1915, Wayne Carter was involved. Longtime secretary. He ran the show. And there's Frank Welch, who was a driver, champion, race winner there at the Speedbowl for many years. And Frank's career ended because he was involved in an automobile accident, highway automobile accident, hurt his back real bad, and that ended his racing career. But then after his racing career, he became Wayne Carter's right-hand man. And Frank Welch did everything. He announced races, flagged the races, officiated, did everything. He became the man at Grundy County Speedway after the passing of Wayne Carter. And there's Frank Welch later, many years later, probably in the 80s, presenting a trophy to Dave Weltmar, track champion that year. And Frank was always there. I mean, he kind of ran the place. I worked for him for 10 years as a track announcer out there, and always honest with me, fair, but what Frank said, it was the word. That's how it went. Whether you agreed with him, disagreed with him, his comment, his law was it. And there's Wayne Carter there with some of the other drivers, Jim Cushing, a track official, Norm Fritz is one of the guys, and Red Carhart is the guy next to Wayne Carter there on the right, with their trophies. Boy, I wish I had one of those for the living room. And there's Red Carhart in Joliet at his local body shop or sponsor. Neat-looking car, neat-looking race car. Don't see all that cowcatcher in the front. So, and there's Walt Kowalczyk, number 66. And that's your typical race car. From stock car at the Mazan Speedbowl in the 50s, and talking to Frank Welch years ago, he said, yeah, the coupes, those were the cars to go or to beat. Most of them were Fords of some kind. Some guys had GMC 6s in them that ran pretty well. And but that's your classic car. And I'll give a shout out to the photographer, Bill Shipley. He took those pictures. His little logo is down there in the lower right-hand corner, but he took a lot of those early shots at the Speedbowl. There's another corporate sponsorship back then. Schlitz. Speaking of Schlitz, Bill Finkel, he was from the Marseilles area, but I don't even see a car number. Oh yeah, 600, but boy, he's got Schlitz on there and something brothers, pretty slick. Noted Mazan drivers. We'll go through this real quick. Norm Legner, two-time champion. He was the first stock car champion at Mazan, and then he repeated again in 1955. Bud Ferguson, he was from Morris. He was the winner of the first stock car race ever held there in 1950. We mentioned Frank Welch and Bob Tattersall, early stock car drivers. A fellow by the name of Bob Waters. He was one of the top runners there, was a 200-lap winner there in 1952. And the names go on and on. Frank Zink, Clem Lewandowski, Bernie Wilhelmy from Joliet, started his racing career at Mazan, stock car driver, later moved up into the midgets and raced midgets for many, many years. And we'll mention Arnie Gardner and Bill Barnes and Eric Johnson, Bobby Schell, and Jerry Kemperman, all stock car champions at the Mazan Speedbowl. Arnie Gardner out of Batavia, he had the honor of winning two 300-lap stock car races, one in 1956 and 1957 at the Mazan Speedbowl. Frank Welch told me a story. They're going to have the fair races, and they're not running weekly. They're just running their 2 or 3, 4 stock car races, and Frank's going out, and he's going to sign up some drivers. We're going to get some drivers from Raceway Park and Sycamore Speedway, or Bob Joe Speedway back in the day. And he goes to Bob Joe Speedway, and they're ready to throw him in jail. They're going to escort him off the premises because he's, what are you doing here? Trying to grab our drivers from? No, just it's a Sunday afternoon race. I just want to, need some cars and drivers. But they didn't take kindly to Frank showing up and trying to get some drivers for the races at Mazan.
That was before power steering, too.
Yeah, exactly. I find this interesting. This was in the Morris Daily Herald newspaper, July 5th, 1958, and the headline read, Jet Pell wins Mazan feature. And it was the 4th of July, 1958, and it goes on there telling you about this big race at Mazan, 500 laps. 500 laps in some of these cars. And it was the biggest purse, or one of the biggest purses ever, acclaimed the story. $3,000 purse, and first place money went to this driver, Jet Pell of Elkhart, who carried home $1,000 for his win. That day, there was 8 people injured. A car crashed outside of turn 3 and got into some people there in the pits, and luckily there was no fatalities. Everybody survived to go to the races another day. But the actual winner of this race was not Jet Pell, and it was a fellow by the name of Ted Schroeder from Hobart, Indiana, driving Jeff Culp's number 97 Ford Coupe. And there's a day at the races, and these cars were a little more modified. Some of these guys came out of Michigan and Indiana, and they had a little lighter car and a little more horsepower possibly, but look at the crowd back there. That's just a section of the stands. So there's a lot of people that day in 1958, 4th of July. And there's that 97 car on the far left. That's Ted Schroeder taking the checkered flag, and a couple of other cars in there taking the flag and finishing up for the day. But 500 laps, can you imagine that in one of those cars? And there they are, there's the crew. Ted Schroeder, he's the fellow with the white pants on the right, and they're happy as a lark. They just won $1,000 and $1,000 in 1958. I don't know how much it's worth today, but. And look at this safety feature here. 2 big fuel tanks in the back of that little coupe. And there's Schroeder just winning, and one of his pit crew guys congratulating him. But notice those 2 fuel tanks. I don't think that would pass today, but.
He's got a quick change, too.
Yeah, he probably had like a little modified or sprint car quick change rear end in it. There's some more racing there. And they had 2, as I mentioned, they had 2 500-lap races there at Mazan, at the Speedbowl, 1958, one at 4th of July, and then later there was another one in September. And these were the type of cars that were kind of the front-running cars and kind of put the local cars kind of to the back. These were nothing more than super modifieds. I don't know what else you'd call them. I mean, you can see they were pretty much stripped down. You put a big V8 engine in them and a little car and a little body work, and pretty fast, and hang on is right. And there's Dick Good, the fellow with the racing T-shirt there on kind of in the center of the photo. He was from Mishawaka, Indiana. He won that second 500 lapper in September of 1958. And that was his car, and you can see it's a super modified. It's not a stock car by any means. The fair, 1969 newspaper telling all about the fair and the stock car races and everything else that's going on. And they would publish this little newspaper every year for many years of, what's going on, what's the race dates. The midgets are racing these days, the stock cars are racing these days. I think that's Jerry Peterson in a 53 car maybe on the left, and Harry Simonson from Chicago in a convertible there. And I remember the one time I went to Mazan, and I only won once or twice. And Harry Simonson won that day in that car. And thanks, Gordy, for the newspaper. Bob Roper, number 6, he was from Chicago. Now we're getting down towards the end. They ran, I don't have the exact dates, but all of a sudden they started running more. 1950, 51, 52, they were running regularly, weekly. Then they stopped racing weekly. Then they started up racing again at Mazan on a weekly basis. And Bob Roper was one of the champions. He was a 1969 late model champion. Car number 6, a little Chevy 2. Ray Young, number 99, Ray Young. He was the 1970 late model champion at the Grundy, at the Mazan Speedbowl. And Ray was the last champion at Mazan, and that's 1970. Tobacco chewing truck driver from Dalton. I found these couple of shots. I don't know if they're from Ron Kessler's or Glenn Meyer's collection, but you can see here's this. That's Lynn Bumgardner, and it just gives you an idea how those stands. And there was like a cutout there at the start finish line, and a lot of people though there for the Friday night races in 1970. And another, there gives you, there's the announcer's booth up there, the judge's stand, I guess as they would call it. And there's kind of that little cut to get through the stands in the middle of the grandstands on that north side straightaway. The last race at Mazan was September 18th, 1970, the last race at the Mazan Speedbowl. Lee Schuler from Lockport came home to winner in the late model feature, and Dave Mattel was the 6-cylinder feature winner that day in September 1970. Ray Young, we mentioned, was a late model track champion, and a driver by the name of Bob Armstrong was the 6-cylinder track champ. And that was it, September 18th, 1970. That was the end of the Mazan Speedbowl. And I've heard all kinds of stories. The Mazan, the fairgrounds down there in Mazan, they were landlocked. There was not enough room to expand. I heard the plumbing and whatever, septic area was not big enough. And I heard, well, the one thing I heard here recently, or the last year or so, they moved Mazan, or the Grundy County Fairgrounds, to Morris out of Mazan because Mazan was dry on Sundays. Can't sell much beer, That's part of auto racing, having the beer concession, Important, pay some of the bills. A friend of mine sent this picture to me, I don't know, this is like in 2012, I think it is, and this shows you Mazan and pretty much shows you today, and I'm going to ask Ron Kessler to help me here because I'm going to screw this up, I know. Is this thing working? No. But anyways, give me a second. I got to practice this at home. There we go. All right. Here's the infield of the Mazan Speedbowl. Okay. You can still, there's some of the town encroaching on the fairgrounds area, the old fairgrounds. Here's some more of that. Ron, correct me if I'm wrong now. This is right here is the grandstand area, correct? Right in that area?
No,
down in here? And that's got that cement walkway behind it still? So there's the track, and here's the grandstand area. And it still you still can go over there. Ron took me over there one day, and it's still got the little walkway, and you can still see some of the cement framework, et cetera, for the grandstands back in the day. So this was during rodeo in 2006. That's what this aerial shot. But so it gives you an idea. If you folks are familiar with Mazan and that area, that's where it was laid out at back in the day.
Where's Grand Ridge Road on there?
Help.
North of it. Keep going up.
Because there's the grain elevator up top.
Yep.
Up there's,
About right in there. About right. Come down right in there is where Grand Ridge is.
okay.
Got it. 47's out near where the sergeant stripes are. 47.
Where's
And it's-
Wouldn't 47 be more out here,
Yeah. Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Way out there. No. So that's Mazan Speedbowl, but it was at the old Mazan Fairgrounds, the Grundy County Fairgrounds in Mazan. And then we go track that I just kind of found out about a month or so ago, maybe. The Midway Quarter Midget Track. And if anybody here knows what it was really called, all I know it was called the Midway. It was midway between Morris and Mazan, and they ran quarter midgets there. It was close to the intersection of 47, Route 47 and 113. And they ran there in the late 50s and into the 60s, quarter midgets. And it was sanctioned and officiated by the Mazan Quarter Midget Racing Association. So these are quarter midgets, and I passed up the one picture, and I don't know how to flip this thing back, so I'm not going to screw it up. But Bob, that picture before, how do you get back? I'm what do you call, technically challenged here. Plus I can't see very well. No, we're going the wrong way. But there was a picture of Bob Tattersall and Tony Saylor pretty much sitting outside the cars there racing. But the car number 4 in that picture was a fellow by the name of Terry Nichols. And I wish I could get this thing to come back, but I don't know how. Anyhow, so that was the quarter midget track, and there were several of these tracks throughout the Midwest. Chicago area had a couple, 2 or 3 of them, and they had one here right down the road here between Morris and Mazan. Grundy County Speedway opened on May the 30th, 1971. New fairgrounds, the new Grundy County Fairgrounds on Route 47 and on the north end of Morris. They opened for business. And here are some pictures I don't think anybody's ever seen before. Here is the new Grundy County Speedway being built. The grandstands are being assembled. There's the judges stand up on top, and the more I look at that picture, I'm happy I'm not announcing there anymore. It just doesn't. I always look down and get a little nervous. But these are from the John McCarn's family photo albums. And there's another shot of it and another shot of the track. That's the kind of like where you'd walk in now from the pit area into the behind the grandstands, concession area, etc. So they're putting it together for opening day. And there's downturn 1 and 2 of the new Speedway in 1971, early in the. And I don't really know. I don't know if this is like late 1970 or early 1971. I'm not real sure of the dates of these pictures, but it gives you an idea as they're putting this place together. And a driver by the name of Ray Freeman, he was from Crete, Illinois. This picture was at Waukegan Speedway, but Ray Freeman was the first late model feature winner on May the 30th, 1971. And there's a shot of the pits in one of the early races there at Morris, the Grundy County Speedway. I see Ray Young's, looks like number 9 there, but 99, Woody Church, 55, 61, Lee Schuler from Lockport, and way in the back over there in the left corner was a fellow by the name of Bob Pronger. And Bob Pronger won the second feature race at Grundy County Speedway there in the first few races, 1971. Interesting fact about Pronger, Mr. Pronger. Drove usually with a white shirt and a black tie. I think it was hot that day. I know it was hot that day. He had an open collar, a little warm. Pronger raced for many, many, many years at Raceway Park, was a two-time track champion there. 1953, he goes and gets a brand new Oldsmobile, goes down to Daytona when he ran on the beach, the speed tests, and he sets some new track records or new beach records. The guy is, and he'd run this, he'd run convertible racing, he'd come back to Raceway Park and win at Soldier Field. The guy, he was a talented driver. Well, this is like June the 6th or 4th, whatever it is. Within a month, he disappears from the face of the earth, never to be heard or seen again. Bob Pronger, a real legend in Chicago area racing, won one feature race at Grundy and basically disappeared. Some early shots of the six-cylinder division there at Grundy I think I took these pictures back in 1971, the second race of the year. Pronger was the late model feature winner, and I don't know who won that six-cylinder. Larry Cooper, did you win? No. First track champion in the late model division at Grundy was Ed Hoffman from Niles, Illinois at the time. And there's Ed's headshot of him, and he had this stretched 70 Camaro that Bob Boyce, famous chassis builder, car builder, put together, won the championship the year before at Illiana Motor Speedway, sold the car to Ed Hoffman, and Hoffman won a lot of races with this black #1 car. I always thought it was interesting. I don't know if it shows, this picture shows it, but it looks like his head, the helmet, stuck out of the top of the roll cage. There's Hoffman a couple of years later racing with Ray Young, another track champion at Grundy, also won that last championship, as we mentioned, at Mazan, racing on a Sunday afternoon during the fair. Midget racing, Grundy County Speedway. The first midget race at Grundy County Speedway happened July 3rd, 1971. Was sanctioned by the United Auto Racing Association, UARA. Jim Gates from Plano, Illinois was the feature winner that day. They had 40 entries, and fast time was what? Jim Gates, 16.40 seconds. Bruce Field, were you there that day?
Yes. I
Started. Other UARA feature winners that first year, Tom Steiner, Gary Byers, Denny Kulik, George Cladis, and Mike Adams. And the tradition continued. A new racetrack, a new Grundy County Speedway, but midget racing, which was kind of an important part of that whole Mazan Speedbowl, Grundy Fairgrounds in Mazan. We're still racing midgets there. Tom Steiner, number 46, carrying the American flag during opening ceremonies one night in 1971. Tom Steiner was a real step on the gas, pavement track, most of the time specialist. He was really fast. Unfortunately, he was involved in an automobile accident, highway accident, and that ended his racing career about 1980, 81 or so. Lee Schuler from Lockport. He was the second late model champion at Grundy County Speedway. Schuler, 1972 champion, and the Schuler name is still carried on. I mean, Larry Schuler and Tracy Schuler and grandson Tristan Batson racing stock cars out there at the Grundy County Speedway. Remember that name, Larry Schuler. We'll get back to him here. But Lee Schuler, and he's kind of a guy, he'd be racing at Grundy. He'd go over to Raceway Park to run. Then he'd go to Waukegan Speedway. He was all over, and he was a feature winner. Ray Young, another fellow in a Mustang there, he was a favorite in the Chicago area, wherever he raced, he was one of the fan favorites. Right, John?
Yes, sir.
Dick Trickle. You followed Midwest stock car racing here in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Moving forward, he was a top guy, top running driver. This is 1974 at a Tri-R Promotions late model special at Grundy. Looks like a fairly decent crowd. I think this is after the race. I'm not sure. But Trickle and his number 99 cars, I mean, he won 67 feature races in late model racing, I think don't quote me on it, but in the 70s, I believe. But he always, and he was at the Artco races when Artco moved into town in 1975. Dick Trickle, top guy. This is Tom Musgrave, I should say, two-time champion, 1974 and 75. He was from up in the Mundelein, Illinois area. His dad, Elmer Musgrave, was a front runner at tracks like Wilmot and Waukegan on the dirt. And then his younger brother, Ted Musgrave, followed the family's racing fortunes, raced stock cars at Waukegan and Grundy, and ended up in NASCAR racing. Won a NASCAR Truck Series championship one year. But this is Tom Musgrave, and two-time champion. In about 1974, he was really, really hard to beat out there. Wayne Carter Classic, the beginning of Artco racing. September 7th, 1975, Tom Refner from Rudolph, Wisconsin was the winner that day in his Javelin, number 88. Set a track record that afternoon, and getting the trophy there from Art Frigo. And he followed racing back in the 70s and early 80s. Art Frigo and John McCarnes, Artco racing, it was pretty much top shelf stuff in the Midwest. And Artco, what was Artco? Well, Art Frigo will tell you, Artco. First name, Art. Take the last two letters of the last name, Frigo, Artco. That was it. We mentioned Larry Schuler, 1976, young guy out of Lockport, Illinois. Just sensational year. I don't know if you could ever duplicate what he did that year in 76. Won 3 track championships in 3 states. One at Grundy County Speedway, won the late model championship there. One at Illiana Motor Speedway in Schererville, Indiana. And also won at the Wisconsin International Raceway up in Wisconsin. Won 43 late model feature races that year, and that was tops that year for any late model driver in the country. A few pictures, and it was the Junkyard Dog Camaro built over there in Al's garage. And George Appleton was the designer of that car, and several other guys were involved in the ownership of it, and they just set the world on fire. It set the precedent, I think, for future years of late model racing. There's Larry and his wife Sue after a Wayne Carter Classic win in 1981, and John McCarnes is the fellow on the right there. And John was involved in racing throughout the Middle West. He was a track announcer and PR man at Waukegan Speedway for a number of years, did the same jobs at the Grundy County Speedway in the first few years that the track opened, and took on. Art Frigo was a businessman originally from New York, sold the business to John and his wife Sue, the Artco business, and John carried that on for many, many, many years until it was taken over by NASCAR. We mentioned Larry Schuler, 71 years old, still racing. He was at the Bentonhausen Classic this past Saturday night, ready to go. And there he is carrying the checkered flag earlier this year during opening ceremonies at what I used to call the Friday night racing place. Dave Weltmeyer, another top guy that got the job done wherever he raced. He won in ARCA, USAC, Raceway Park, Grundy, Illiana, all over Florida. He's top runner, but he won 2 championships at Grundy, 1984, 1986, and he was a 6-time winner of the Lee Schuler Memorial Race that they have every year during the night of features on that Labor Day Sunday weekend. Midget racing, get back to midget racing at the Grundy County Speedway. There's been a number of sanctioning organizations, excuse me, I lose my voice. United Auto Racing Association, UARA for short. The World of Outlaw Midgets, WOOM. The United Midget Auto Racing Association. Short Track Auto Racing Stars. United States Auto Clubs, USAC. The Illini Racing Series, and the current sanctioning group out there is the Midwest Mayhem Midgets, and they concluded their season with Jimmy Anderson winning their first overall midget title this past summer. Aaron Willis, I got to have a call out to him, originally from the Joliet, Illinois area. Aaron Willis carried midget auto racing on his back at Grundy County Speedway for many, many years. He formed the United Midget Auto Racing Association Group, UMARA, after the UARA kind of folded. And Aaron and his family, his wife and daughter and son helped him, but he was a former racer, and he was a promoter of the midget races at Grundy every Saturday night during the summer. Maybe they took 1 week off in a month, but he carried the ball for midget racing. And I think without Aaron Willis and his efforts over the year, and his family also, there would have maybe midget racing around here would have just kind of dried up a little bit. Maybe, maybe not. Looking at some of the top guys, Jim McLean, that's front runner from, I believe, from Joliet or in that area. And that's a Bob and Danny Lockhart Badger midget. And that car was unbeatable. I mean, they'd win in USAC and WOOM and UARA. They just got the job done. Jim McLean there did most of the local racing, but they had Johnny Parsons driving for them and Mac McClellan driving. That car was fast on pavement. It was just crazy. Jim Gates, we talked about him winning the first midget auto race in 1971. He was a multi-time champion with the WOOM group and also with UARA previously. Midget racing action, whoops, hold on here. Guys, sparks flying, and people want to see some of that sometimes, but hopefully nobody gets injured or tears up too much equipment. Women racers, and there's been a whole bunch of them over the years at Grundy, and here in the recent, I don't know, what year is it, 2024? Okay. Say the last 10 or so years, there's been a whole bunch of them out there, and my notes, they're not here, so help me, Cheryl. Who are these drivers? That's Cheryl Wren, I know, in the number 8 on the top. Who's the young lady in the 42? Christy Penrod. She won the championship in street stocks that year. And then we've got 44 is Renee Farron. Alex Gay with the checkered flag, right? There's Alex Gay up on the top, 62. And Christy Odom in the 30. And up on the top there's Danielle Dobchek in 17. And 210 is Katie Hocking, and there's Dobchek in the 17, and JoJo Fatke, who ran second this past Sunday in the Super Cup division. So there's been a lot of women drivers over the year. And Cheryl Wren is with us today. Hi, Cheryl. She does a great job. She's kind of put that racing on the back burner, but until she was coming down 80 today, she was stepping on the gas kind of hard. But to get here, but she's done a lot of stuff. She's provided the book bag deal and help me out, and the lap prizes for the Bentonhausen races and bike night, giving bunches of bicycles away to some lucky kids in the grandstands. And I applaud you, Cheryl. We talk about women racers. Here's some of the early girls back in the day at the Mazan Speedbowl. So women in racing have been part of the Grundy County racing area for many, many years. Some other champions, late model champions. Dave Evans from up in Crystal Lake, Illinois, won in 1979. Tom Jones, the popular Tom Jones, he was a track champion at Grundy in 1981. His son, Andy, still turning the wheel. He was in the Bentonhausen 100 lapper the other night. And if you had a presentation about racing in the Grundy County area, you have to include Dan Odell. He raced for many, many years, 20 plus years, I think it was. And there's one of his early cars down there in the lower left. Dan at the top photo, Dan on the gas in his number 33 and in the infield after a crash. But Dan Odell was just a guy you could count on to be there at Grundy every Friday night during the racing season. He was from, as I mentioned, I think from Morris. Brett Sontag, Joliet driver, the number 5. He won 5 track championships at the Grundy County Speedway in 2001 through, the last one was 2010. Another step on a gas type of guy. His nephews and his brothers have been involved in the racing out there for many, many years also, but Brett Sontag was a guy that could get the job done. Ricky Baker in 52 and Paul Schaefer in the 7 car, both former track champions at the Grundy County Speedway. Racing, that's the last lap in May of 2021. I mean, they're on the gas and they're right there on top of each other, racing hard for the checkered flag. Other champions. Anthony Danta won the championship in 2016 at Grundy in the number 51 car. And the previous year, he was a champion at Indiana Motor Speedway in its final year in 2015. Billy Nippenberg, two-time champion out there at Grundy in 2005 and 2017 in a 01 car. And Billy today is the promoter at the Kankakee County Speedway on Friday nights on the dirt out there. There's Ricky Baker, number 52, two-time champion, won, I think, 3 Bentonhausen 100 lappers in recent years, gets the job done each and every week. Paul Schaefer Jr. from Portage, Indiana, 2020 Grundy late model champion, two-time winner of the Bentonhausen Classic. Looked like he might have won last week, but just didn't have enough. The Weltmeyers, Dave Weltmeyer on the top left there, father, and DJ Weltmeyer. Dave Weltmeyer, two-time champion at Grundy, and DJ Weltmeyer was the 2022 champion at Grundy County Speedway. Cars look pretty similar, don't they? And just this past Saturday, Stan Zolotz, the fourth from Hobart, Indiana, was the winner of the Bentonhausen 100. Great race, exciting. I don't know what else you could say. They had 28 cars, started 24, some great racing. And that whole Grundy track, if you haven't been out there in the last several weeks or so, you need to go out there. I've been going out there since 1971, and I have to pinch myself nowadays to say I'm at Grundy County Speedway. They put some track adhesive product in the second groove and have made it like double file racing, side-by-side type racing, and it's a lot more exciting. And I was talking to John Brolick, the tire man there, former champion, two-time champion at Grundy, that and now selling the tires. It's just some dust gets on that bottom groove, and we had so much no rain, a lot of dust going on here recently, and boom, that outside groove has just come in, and before you drive to the bottom, get inside a guy, and by the next corner you'd pass him. Well, that ain't the case anymore. It's side by side, hang under your seat racing. We talked about Grundy late model champions, and the names and the number next to him is Eddie Hoffman's got 9 championships now. He was the champion this year. His dad, Ed Hoffman, has 6. Brett Sontag, 5. Those are your top 3 guys. Pat Kelly, Mike White, Mike Varner with 3 championships over the years. Ricky Baker with 2. Billy Nippenberg with 2. John Brolick in the house tonight with 2. Dave Weltmeyer with 2. Tom Musgrave with 2. And then everybody else has 1 from DJ Weltmeyer, Paul Schaefer, Anthony Danta, Tom Smith, Joe Linehouse Jr., Biff George, Tracy Schuler, Tony Hertko, Frank Galinsky, Tom Jones, Dave Evans, Ray Young, Larry Schuler, and Lee Schuler. That's your honor roll as far as late model champions go at the Grundy County Speedway. Mentioned Eddie Hoffman. He picked up his 9th championship this year. He's got 155 feature wins. He's the all-time feature winner at Grundy, and as far as championships go, he's the all-time winner at that. 9 and 155 wins.
The GOAT.
The GOAT. GOAT. Greatest. Oh, yeah. Okay. I didn't. Grundy, this past year, before the season started, they put a figure 8 inside the third mile track. And they had all kinds of races. They had trailer races and boat races and what else? Bus races. And the one night they called it the Thrill Night. Well, here's a perfect example of the Thrill Night at Grundy. It looks like a bus going for a ride and smoke flying and dust and everything else. But that's what some people want to see. I mean, there's some pure race fans, but some people just like to go to the races for entertainment. Take their 2 little kids and the wife and go watch and eat a hot dog and drink a beer or something, and just for entertainment. They're not there, oh my God, my favorite driver didn't win or did win or whatever. So this is a new stepping stone for them. In a couple of weeks, they're going to have the Bahama Brackets at the Grundy County Speedway. That was run for many, many years at the now defunct, closed, being torn down as we speak, Rockford Speedway. And that they get over 100, 200 cars, right, for those Bahama brackets. And it's bracket racing. You take almost any type of stock car, and you just go out there, turn in some qualifying laps, and you could be racing a street stock against a modified, against a sportsman car or whatever. And it kind of neat, a lot of racing. I mean, they break it down in class A, B, or triple A, and whatever. But it gives everybody a chance to win, and it's kind of a neat deal. So Grundy, this is their first time they're going to have it in a couple of weeks. If you're interested, go out to the races. I'd like to thank folks, Steve Bechtel, Jerry Clark, Gordy Enerson, Chris Goodacre, Andy Grod, Ron Kessler, Jeff McCarnes, Greg McCarnes, and Glenn Myers for their help putting this together. A lot of these pictures came from different collections. Ron Kessler, the Mazan man himself here today, helped gather just tons of information and tons of photos over the years. My hat's off to you guys. Thank you very much. Also, I got to give a shout out to the Mazan Speedbowl Grundy County Speedway Hall of Fame group. A number of the board of directors are here with us tonight, and that's kind of a neat thing if you're into nostalgia and racing and seeing some of the old racers. It's usually held the Saturday afternoon of Labor Day weekend, and they have Ron Kessler started it, or was one of the guys that started. They've got 4x8 sheets of plywood. I don't know if there's 40, 50, 150, I don't know. 4,000 pictures, 8x10s, black and whites mainly, of all these drivers. I mean, from the early days of the midget racing at the fairgrounds in Mazan to last week at the Grundy County Speedway. And it's neat. And an induction ceremony, they usually get 6, 8 people inducted. It's a neat deal. So that's every probably Saturday of Labor Day weekend, right? A lot of the information I used was from this book, A History of Auto Racing at the Grundy County Fair, Mazan, Illinois, Racetracks, 1923 to 1970. It was written by Art Peacock, who was an interesting gentleman, lived, I believe, in Morris or Mazan, I can't remember. But he put this book together and just went through all these files of the Morris Daily Herald looking for information. And like I said, one thing before I go farther, he was one of Johnny Rutherford's early sprint car owners. But Art searched all these racing or Morris Daily Herald papers and could find nothing before 1926. Some people say 1915, some people say 1923, but like I said earlier in this presentation, 1926 is the earliest documented race I can find. I dedicate this to these folks, Wayne Adams, Wayne Carter, Ron Kessler, John McCarnes, Art Peacock, Bob Sheldon, and Frank Welch. They were friends of mine, and Ron is still here with us, and good to see you, Ron, tonight. And without them, I think they just kind of pointed me in the right direction to do this stuff like this. And that's it. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. Any questions? I was going to start that out. It's like, any questions? Oh, there, okay. Yes, sir.
Stanley, does anybody even know who built the Grundy County Speedway? Who funded it? Who built it? Who do you thank for it?
The Grundy County Fair Board. I mean, it was Wayne Carter and Frank Welch, and help me if somebody else.
Does anybody know who funded it? How it ever got built?
Well, somebody owned the property where it's at, the Carter family. I don't know that.
Nobody else knows.
It's a secret.
It's a secret.
Yeah, I mean, the names Carter and Welch and several others. I mean, they always seem to be in the mix, and to move it from Mazan down there,
Yeah.
and all that property, acres of property at Grundy.
What made me think of it was when I saw the steel structure.
Yeah, I mean that.
It took some financing to do that.
Yeah.
But you never hear of anybody that's ever been responsible for being the person that was
The fair board,
behind it all.
the fair board have any money in it?
Yeah, I would imagine, you know. I'll have to do some research on that, John. And
The
by
fair board's not,
next September, I'll have an answer
the fair
for you.
board's only a voting fair board, they always say. It's not a, they don't own any of the fair. So that's what-
Good point, yeah. I mean, you had to have some jingle to get that going. I mean, them iron workers didn't put
they
that
were
up.
free.
Yeah,
No.
you know, we got this free steel today and we're gonna make some grandstands. Good point, and I don't know the answer, John.
Thank you.
Any other, Dick Lubbers?
When they first moved the grandstands back up north over from Grundy, it had a roof over it, and I remember when the wind took that away.
Yep. Yeah, and that matter of fact, if you go to Grundy still, there's these cement blocks in the grandstand or concession areas. They're still there, and they just blew it off. And I heard a story, but Gordy corrected me. I heard a story. It blew it way off and into the parking lot, but I guess it just dislodged it and it ended up.
Traveled. But also they had parachuters putting on a display, and his chute didn't open,
Ooh.
and you could see him. They were a ways out, but you could still figure out what was going
On
Right.
at the airport.
He got the thing to pop.
Ooh.
So, and then maybe a half hour later, he came walking and climbed over the fence with the chute.
Better man than me. Any other questions? Well, thank you again for coming, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.